Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. It is Tuesday the 15th of October 2019 and tonight's topic. Central banks issue warnings on global warming. Now, central banks have been talking about global warming for a while, but they seem to be stepping up the pace. We're going to go through tonight the most recent comments by the Bank of England's president, Mark Carney. He was talking about global warming recently and making some warnings about how companies that do not adapt will go bankrupt. And there's been a lot of talk about it, and it seems to be an issue that the central banks are focused on now. We're going to talk about a survey among central banks and what they're thinking about global warming and climate change. And tonight we're also going to talk about the latest with Libra. Looks like Libra, as I had predicted back when they announced it, probably wouldn't get past go. And it looks like we've had some major cancellations. And it looks like there's been some arm twisting by the U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, talking about how Libra doesn't get up to snuff on anti-money laundering issues. As you know, the current administration, the Trump administration, are not fans of cryptocurrency. They mentioned specifically Bitcoin. They actually have the power to not grant Libra its licenses that it may be seeking, and have discouraged major companies from abandoning Libra and the Libra Association. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about J.P. Morgan. And J.P. Morgan, as you know, has had some issues with regulators in the United States, and now it looks like they may have some issues with the British regulators. All right, let's get into this global warming, climate change interest now that the central banks have been focused on. But I want to use Carney as an example. Back in August at Jackson Hole, Carney gave a speech, and to me it was humorous. He was using all of the gold pumper terms: game changer, China to crush the dollar, my Belt and Road. He had all of the signature sounds of the gold pumper alarmists, and I don't know why he was saying all that stuff. Dollar hegemony. Here, I called it at the time Jackson Hole's other game-changing speech. The first speech was the one everyone was focused on, what Jerome Powell of the Federal Reserve is going to say. And actually, that's the only one that matters. All these other central banks, they can talk all they want. The whole thing is based on the dollar, and it's based on whatever the Fed does. We've seen how the Fed works with foreign central banks to conduct basically global monetary policy. The ECB acts at the direction, it seems, from the Federal Reserve. We've talked about how Mario Draghi was convinced, the president of the European Central Bank, to do QE after Stanley Fischer, the former vice chairman under Yellen of the Federal Reserve, convinced him to do it. They've done a bigger QE than the Fed did, over $5 trillion now. They even went as far as buying corporate bonds. We know Japan, the Bank of Japan, is basically also a vassal of the Federal Reserve. They coordinate monetary policy, Bank of England, and so on. That doesn't mean they don't have their differences. It doesn't mean that they actually like the system, having the dollar at the front of it. Well, we saw back in August with Carney, and he was talking about it's kind of ridiculous. He was talking about the dollar hegemon, and that the most likely candidate for true reserve currency status was the Chinese yuan, the game-changing yuan, the RMB. And then it was saying the blocks are for building this or there. China is the world's leading trading nation, overtaking the U.S., and the renminbi is now more common than sterling and oil. Future benchmark, there's your petro yuan. Then it was mentioning how it's being used, growing use in international finance. Now, he's not giving any numbers, and it really isn't growing. But this is the whole pump of China and he's saying they're reforming their monetary, foreign exchange, and financial systems. Not really. And they've liberalized and improved financial market infrastructure, making the renminbi a more reliable store of value. And then he talks about the Belt and Road Initiative. Anyway, the whole thing was was basically, it sounded like the gold pumpers when they start pumping up China. But this was Mark Carney just back in August, a couple of months ago. Well, now he's back in the news, and he's talking about, let's talk about what he said about climate change. But this isn't the first time he's done this, because he wrote an open letter back in April warning of climate change. So let's go, maybe let's do it in chronological order and talk about what central banks have been talking about climate change for probably over a year now. Back in April, he and Francis François Villeroy de Galeux, I guess he's the head of the French central bank, he wrote out a letter with the co-letter talking about climate change and the issues that they're going to have. And then the question is, what does this have to do with finance? And they talked about the catastrophic effects of climate change. And we've had blistering heat. This is what they write. Blistering heat waves in North America, to typhoons in Southeast Asia, and droughts in Africa and Australia. These events damage the infrastructure and private property, negatively affect health, decrease productivity, and destroy wealth. Well, enter the central banks to fix all of this. And because of this, climate change will lead to disruptive events such as mass migration, political instability, and conflict. How dare you? I mean, this is what they've been reduced to. The heads of the central bank, they might as well have old Greta show up and tell us we're on the mass extinction. This is why world leaders signed the Paris Climate Accord in 2015. The transition brings its own risks, and anyway, they go on and warning about climate change, and that's back in April. Then it's not just the two of them. It's not just the head of the French central bank and Mr. Carney over in England. No, not just him at all. There's other banks that are interested in combating climate change, and they are now, according to Union Bank of Switzerland, put together a report, and it shows that 62% of central banks believe they have a fiduciary duty to the general public for working on climate risk to the management of their assets. So if you don't have enough to worry about, your risks are under threat from the climate. And this is according to a study. 62% of the central banks believe this. But 2/3 of central banks indicate that they can't really do anything because they don't have these benchmarks to figure out exactly how to deal with climate change. They really want to do something about it, but they don't have the benchmarks. Now, you know what they're going to do. They're going to come up with some type of benchmark that has a warning when a certain number or carbon emissions gets over a certain amount. It's going to have a certain impact on the economy, which of course they'll have right down to a science, which will impact their target inflation rate. And if they don't hit the target inflation rate, there'll be a certain amount of economic slowdown. If the economic slowdown happens, a certain number of people will die. You can see where all that's going. And therefore, you're going to start to see, I believe, central banks make decisions that are just going to say, if we don't do this, it's going to impact the climate, or the climate has already impacted us, so now we have to do this. Either way, it looks like the way they're headed now, if you keep the same personnel in place, that central banks will be using the climate as an indicator, as an economic indicator in conducting their monetary policy. Now, sadly, Mario Draghi will not be around to talk about the impact of the helicopter money, because if we're going to use the helicopters, we have to drop the money, after reprinting the money, how they're going to affect the ecosystem, because the helicopters are going to use, unless we get the solar powered ones, are going to use a certain amount of carbon, and we're not sure if we can print the money and use the helicopter. So he's not going to be around to solve that problem. Now, let's get into the more recent statements. He's not giving up here. Old Charlie, Mark Carney. He says, remember the guy, end of dollar hegemony. He was going on China to crush the dollar just a couple of months ago. And a couple of months before that, he was going off with the French president of the Central Bank of France. And they were talking about the dangers of climate change. Well, he's back on it. And he's saying that firms that ignore climate crisis will go bankrupt. And let's see what he has to say now. He does an interview. Now, who's he talking to? The Guardian. He's telling The Guardian, we need to tackle the climate crisis to avoid a financial collapse. He said the longer action to reverse emissions was delayed, the more risk of collapse would grow. Now, you can see the cover here. Central banks have been on a binge the last 10 years, doing all types of things that one might think might cause a collapse. And we've talked about this on this channel. And that is the QEs, the endless QEs, the buying of assets, the printing of the money, all of the negative interest rates. But that's not what's going to cause a collapse of the financial system. Nope. Carney says it's all about tackling climate change, because if we don't get on that, that is what's going to cause the risk of collapse to grow. What else does he have to say here? His prediction. There will be industries, sectors, and firms that will do very well during this process because they will be part of the solution, but there will be ones that will lag behind and they will be punished. Yes, they will. How dare they? They will be punished according to Mr. Carney. And he went on to say, in companies that don't adapt will go bankrupt without question. No doubt at all. Yes, no doubt at all. They will go bankrupt. They'll be gone. All right. What else does he have to say here? I think you've heard enough. Well, here's what he says. More quotes. Some assets will go up, many will go down. The question is whether the transition is smooth or whether it's something that is delayed and that it happens very abruptly. This is an open question. The longer the adjustment is delayed in the real economy, the greater the risk that there is a sharp adjustment. The stakes are undoubtedly high, but the commitment of all actors in the financial system will help to avoid a climate-driven Minsky moment. A climate-driven Minsky moment. I guess we've reached the point of no return. The term we use to refer to a sudden collapse in asset prices. So he's actually predicting this. If we don't get on this, we're going to have a collapse. There is need for action to achieve net zero emissions. This is the guy who's in charge of the central bank, not the guy who's in charge over at meteorology or climate science. This is a guy who's in charge of a central bank, and he has determined, not even as a matter of climate, but as a matter of climate impact on the economy. He says that we need to get to net zero emissions. I don't understand how what model does he have that says that this has to happen in order for the economy? Because if you remember what Greta Van, whatever her name was, she was saying the other day, and all you can talk about is unlimited financial growth. Yeah, actually, not combating climate change would probably lead to more financial growth and less chance of a collapse. If you try to slam the brakes on and get to net zero and shut down all the coal and shut down all the oil, you will have a financial collapse. This is what we were talking about. It's nothing to do with climate change. It has everything to do with when you have mega systems. We run on a dollar-based Federal Reserve. Okay, we run on a carbon-based economy. Those are facts. Now, you may say we shouldn't have the Federal Reserve, and you could say we shouldn't have a carbon-based economy. Okay, but to just pull the rug out of both of those, you will cause a collapse. You could say, well, that's a good thing. We need to get rid of that. You can say that, but for Carney to say, if we don't get to net zero emissions, that's going to cause a collapse. No, trying to get to net zero emissions too soon is the way to have an economic collapse. The same thing with in the Fed. If you were to shut the Federal Reserve down tomorrow, you would have a collapse. Anyway, I'm not quite sure why we've entrusted people in finance to talk about climate change, because there's a debate over climate change, and even the people that believe in man-made global warming are not quite sure as to the impact. No one knows what the impacts are. Let's just say you assume that the temperature of the Earth will increase 1 or 2 degrees by a certain period of time. You don't really know what impact that's going to have on the ecosystems. You don't. You don't know exactly how nature is going to react to that. But even more unknown, you have no idea how the economy is going to react to that. What innovations are going to happen, what innovations are not going to happen, what people are going to do in light of any type of changing climate. You cannot predict that. That's the whole purpose of a free market economy. You have no idea what's going to happen. It could be a net positive in some areas. It could be a negative in other areas. But for Carney to come out and say that if this doesn't happen, if we don't get to net zero, we're going to have a collapse, that's actually ignoramus talk. You have no idea what impact that it's going to have on the economy. In fact, this could be a Krugman-type alien invasion. If you actually had a disastrous global warming, you may see an economic mobilization that would be a boom to the economy to combat the any devastating changes that might have occurred. So it's just inconceivable to me that the head of a central bank is coming out and they even admit they don't even have models. Not that the models would mean anything, but just to make blanket statements that this is what we have to do because otherwise we're going to have an economic collapse. Not quite sure. All right, let's move on from Don Carney here. I mean, this is, you might as well just be talking about China to crush. I mean, this is literally what he said in his last speech. China to crush the dollar, petro yuan, multipolar world. He used all these words. Dollar collapse. He didn't mention Sun Tzu. I'm sure his social credit score is very good in China. In the multipolar. Here, look, here it is. These are this is from his speech, Changing the Game, Multipolar World, Belt and Road, R&B. He's talking about the oil futures benchmark, petro yuan. Yeah. All right. Now, the other thing I want to mention about central banks is the Dutch central bank. It's got this little blurb and it got Zero Hedge all excited. They were talking about a collapse. Actually, they weren't. They were talking about how having gold is a good thing. And the Dutch central bank, or the Netherlands bank, holds 600 tons of gold, dank u wel, and it puts them in the top 10. But that's not a lot of gold. I mean, the amount of gold that the Dutch National Bank has is what? It's $6 billion worth, I think. It's not a lot of gold. Yeah, $6 billion. That's what they report, and the amount of gold that they have. But the thing is, they said, which I don't think anyone can argue with, that it's good insurance. But then they said if the system collapses, and anytime you use the word collapse, you're going to get all the people all excited. The gold stock can serve as a basis to build it up again. Not really. Not that little amount of gold. I mean, if you actually believed that there's a potential for a collapse, and all you got is 600 tons of gold, you're not really in that good a shape. In fact, I would argue that most of the central banks don't have enough gold if they actually believe. I would think that Russia's moved into a nice position that they feel as if they had to use a different financial system that wasn't fiat-based, they might have enough gold. Because they'd reprice the gold, obviously. But Holland says what they have is it serves as good insurance. And they say shares, bonds, and other securities are not without risk. That's true. Prices can go down, But a bar of gold retains its value even in times of crisis. Actually, it goes up in a time of crisis. That is why central banks, including the DNB, this is the DNB writing this, the Dutch National Bank, have traditionally held considerable amounts of gold. But remember, all of these Western banks, they're not adding to the gold. Not Germany, not France, not Italy, not the Netherlands, not Belgium, not Austria. None of the Western, not Spain, Portugal, none of the Western central banks, not Bank of England, not Swiss National Bank, have added to gold in 20, 30 years. Now, we did see recently Hungary and Poland add to their gold reserve, but for the most part, they're not doing it. And they clearly know that there's a potential for a collapse, but they just don't seem... I mean, one of the things that Holland did was they repatriated their gold. Okay, so they got their gold back from the United States, but they didn't buy more. It says gold bolsters confidence in the stability of central bank's balance sheet and creates a sense of security. Okay, then buy more. This is what I don't understand. If a central bank actually believes this, Germany says it all the time. But Germany, the central bank of Germany, the Bundesbank, sells 4 tons of gold a year and doesn't replace it. So I'm not quite sure why we're hearing this... yeah, we like gold. Now, the answer could be they're not telling you what they got. If you think, a lot of people say the United States has no gold, which I think is ridiculous. If it was necessary to have gold, of all the countries in the world that have the ability to mine gold, steal gold, print money to buy gold, would be the United States. But I think some of these central banks, maybe like Holland and any of the other European banks, maybe they had agreements not to sell gold, but those agreements didn't prohibit them in the last 20 years from buying gold. So maybe they're not reporting what they have, because if you actually believe there's some type of collapse, financial crisis, like Germany said, the reason they have gold is in case there's a currency crisis. Well, if you think there's any risk of a currency crisis, you might want to add a little more. You wouldn't be selling 4 tons of gold a year to your government so they can mint coins to sell to the people. You say go out and buy that somewhere else. We're not going to, the German gold reserves go down every year. Now, it's 4 tons a year, but over time, it's been, they've lost 100 tons in the last 15, 20 years. And there's no reason for that if they actually believe what they're saying, because Germany has similar language on the German Bundesbank has had similar language on its website talking about why they have gold. They have little videos on there, why gold is good for Germany. But they don't seem, at least publicly, to admit that they're adding any more gold to their reserves. All right, let's see. I was going to do a little bit on the cryptos here. And I was going to do something on legal writing, but it looks like we're up against a little time here. So I am going to... Yep, I'm going to go over to the comments now. So let's see what comments we have on tonight's discussion here. If we have got anything, let's pull down that while I'm looking for, because we'll be back again tomorrow night. Yeah, the last couple of days I was celebrating the exploits of my seafaring ancestors, i.e. it was Columbus Day, and so I took the opportunity to take a couple of days, and now I'm back. I hope to be back, depending on my schedule. I try to get in here every night. I might have to switch that around, but we'll see how it goes. Let's see if I got anything else here for you tonight. No, I think that's it. All right, let's see what you guys are saying in the section of the comments. I'm going to cut off tonight. That's good. All right. What do we got tonight? Well, we got a small crowd. Well, let's see. We got James Weinketer says volume. I'm yelling. I mean, I've had a couple of people have said that, but I've gone back and listened, and I've heard it hasn't sounded bad. I think other channels maybe have it on much higher volume. Philip Quinn is here. Hello, Philip. Fiona is here. Chuck and Plath is late. Philip Quinn says Carney must be a supporter of AOC. I don't know. KZ Gixer, Smaulgld, what are the odds of tonight's Democratic debate being a total blank show? That's one I'm not going to watch. I'll wait for the little blurbs that they put out afterwards. We'll see what they have to say I think tonight, I don't know if it might even be on right now, someone is going to go after, I mean, you'd be foolish not to, and I think it'll probably be Tulsi Gabbard because she's got nothing to lose. Go after Biden for this Ukraine thing. The rest of them are going to go after Trump for impeachment for having the audacity to ask about Biden to a foreign president in the Ukraine. They'll probably all try to outdo each other. And then Liz Warren, she probably won't go after Biden. I think she'll let the others do that for her and try to pretend to appear presidential. Bernie's going to try to pretend to appear healthy, I would imagine, because I think he should drop out. Not for political reasons, not because he doesn't have a chance. I mean, if you're 79 years old and you have a heart attack, you shouldn't be tramping around the country saying the 1% of this country got all the vote and I'm going to make sure. No, you're going to make sure you stay healthy and just relax. So, but Bernie's a friend of the show. He comes on a lot, and I don't think he's going to step down. I think he's going to continue. So we'll see what he said the other day. Now, Elizabeth Sanders, she is a capitalist. She's not like me. Okay, Ernie. You're earning your bona fides with Shay there. All right, the book is 1984 Pablo. Okay, what else do we have here? Lewis, Chuck and Plata, with Carney also saying central banks need gold for the reset. We're not being set up for the same. No, he didn't say, I looked through his speech. Let me just look at it again here. He says all the gold pumper stuff, but he doesn't talk about when the game is over and all that other stuff that we should be moving into a gold standard. So that is the difference. Although the gold pumpers now share a lot with the left in their love for China. They're always talking about China. But Carney is, even Draghi, I remember once they asked him, they said something like, so what assets do you consider purchasing when you do this QE? He goes, we looked at purchasing just about all assets other than gold. I mean, they don't want anything to do with gold. But it's interesting, you get these people coming out, the German bank and the Dutch bank talking about how important gold is. You have Mnuchin go to the Fort Knox. I don't know if that was just a boondoggle to go there, but they tend to, they talk out of both sides of their mouths. They talk out of both sides of their mouth. Some of them are saying they want the gold. The others are saying they're not sure they want the gold, but we're not quite sure what's going on here. But they're all a bunch of rich capitalists, and we shouldn't listen to them anyway. I don't really know what the official position is. If I had to guess, I think they all understand they want gold, but some of them say don't want to admit it, and they're all big fans of the fiat system, but they also know that if the fiat system goes, they don't want to be all in. So I think each country probably that is it. Now, Canada apparently has no gold. No above ground gold, no forms of gold reserves at all. So who knows what they're doing? And again, why should it matter what central banks do? I mean, if you think about it, a lot of people, gold bugs, are talking about we should return to a gold standard. And they're always saying gold is money, period, and silver is money. And then they cite you like the Constitution, which is the Constitution does not say gold or silver is money. What the Constitution says is that no state should just print up anything other than, can't use anything other than gold or silver to pay debt. Doesn't mean gold is money or silver is money. But even if it did, when they cite these Bretton Woods gold standard, that actually makes gold and silver a fiat currency because the government is saying gold is worth $1 at $35 an ounce from 1934 to 1971 under the Bretton Woods Agreement. Money is not, non-fiat money is what people use because not because anyone tells them they need to use it. Legal tender laws are actually fiat money laws. So if people use silver, they don't, as a medium of exchange, then it's money. But if people use silver because the government prints it up for them and reprices it, which they did during the times of silver coinage, then silver was a fiat currency. And then people didn't continue to use silver when they took it out of the money and they put copper and nickel in its place. They used that. They just used fiat copper and nickel instead of fiat silver. It's the same with gold. People don't use gold as a medium of exchange. they did when the government stamped a number on it. So it's somewhat interesting when people go on and on about wanting the gold standard or claiming that gold is money. They want the government to make gold money. They want the government to make silver money again. Just a thought. All right. What else do we got in the comments? Anything else? Anyone else got any thoughts? All right. Oh, we do. Well, yes. Pablo says Columbus Day was yesterday. Yes, but yesterday was when I took off. Central banks don't make any sense for a long time now. They don't make any sense with gold, says Fiona. Yep. Went to a quit room. Much better. Oh, a quiet room. Yes, James. Okay, good. I don't know. I mean, there's no... what I'm seeing on the mic, because if it goes into the red, it's too high. If it goes into the yellow, it's a little like you're yelling. I'm just looking at the control right now, and right now it's at the high end of the green and into the yellow, which is probably perfect, I think. All right, what else do we got? You guys are talking to yourself again. Scam phone calls, text messages. All right, well, I guess I'll let you guys all go and watch the Democrat presidential debates, and we'll see you tomorrow. Unless anyone's got anything else on their minds tonight. Let's see. What do you think, Bernie? Oh, well, I think that I should retire, and I'll make the announcement on your channel when I'm ready to do so. All right, Bernie, will you do that? All right, I'm going to give you the countdown. Then I got to go because I got to go over to the debate. I got to tell Tulsi Gabbard that she's a Russian, but not a Soviet. And 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1%, 0. Everyone have a good night, and I'm going to go have a good debate. Have a good night.